Welcome to the Optimist Circuit, where we build the circuit connecting AI, tech, nature, and people to spark optimism and power real solutions for society.
I'm Ellen.
And I'm Francesca, and we are so glad you're here with us.
Today's guest is Elizabeth Willmott, who spent years at Microsoft as the Chief of Staff to the Chief Sustainability Officer, where she literally wrote Microsoft's carbon negative commitment, redesigned their internal carbon fee, and launched their carbon removal program, all while navigating the immense public scrutiny that comes with making bold promises at scale.
She now runs Earthrise Consulting and works with CSOs and sustainabilities on how to scale climate solutions with integrity at a moment when the pressure to get this right is higher than ever. Elizabeth, welcome to the Optimist Circuit.
Thank you so much for having me. Delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you.
We are thrilled for you to join us, and we are thrilled to pick up on some of the recent conversations we've had. In fact, a fitting place to start, it feels, is the topic of what it means to be human right now in a time of AI and nature complexity and the path to being our true selves amidst all that. You mentioned feeling excited about what it means to be human in the age of AI and climate change. It's a unique perspective to take. And so I wanted to ask you, what is driving that for you right now?
Well, I do a lot of meditation and I do a lot of spiritual inquiry. And I just have really come to feel that we don't have to make this a fearful time. We don't have to make this a terrible time in our minds. It could actually be interesting. That's not an original thought. A lot of different spiritual teachers are saying that right now in terms of trying to find personal resilience in this chaotic moment in the world. And that's not to diminish crazy things that are happening and difficult things that are happening. But I just think that we see these enormous rivers flowing together at the moment, not only the obvious context of AI reshaping our collective future of our daily lives, our work, the changing natural world, and how our connection to nature is more precious than ever, and how we relate to other people, the conflicts we see around the world. I've actually experienced a lot of adversity in my own life personally, and I've just come from that very personal perspective to realize that these things that happen in the outside world don't need to provoke fear and anxiety. Mm. It's natural that they do, but I really work every day to try to find the layers of life that are inspiring and hopeful and beautiful and connecting to other people and connecting to nature to make the most of this precious life that we have on this planet. So it's very much for me as much a personal and kind of, dare I say, spiritual kind of challenge to myself as it is any sort of political statement.
I find that really interesting. And obviously it has the optimistic spin of, as we talked about earlier, the spirit of what we hope to embody in this podcast. But I also find it really interesting because in my own experience with therapy, and I may also say spirituality, you can't control what happens outside of you. And it's natural to have reactions to those things, but you can control how you respond. And so in this AI climate change era, I do agree that like one of the biggest things we can do is choose how we respond. And I feel, and I just actually saw an article in the Washington Post about the power of optimism for health. But I also feel like if people feel empowered and optimistic, they're more likely to take action to create a better future rather than just feeling negative about a lot of things. You have mentioned in the past a movement you were very interested in called solar punk. Can you explain a little bit more, like what is that?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an ambassador for solar punk because I'm just like inspired by it. I think other people are actually doing it. But what I love about solar punk is that it's hopeful, sustainable, community rooted. And basically the vision is that technology and ecology don't have to crash into each other. They can actually reinforce each other. And so to me, it's like very much, I'm kind of a stand-up comedy nerd. And I just love like watching stand-up comedy and like listening to podcasts. And it kind of comes back to the stand-up comedy or improv comedy idea of yes and. Like,
Mm.
yes, this and that. If someone's standing on stage doing an improvisation, the number one rule of thumb with a partner is to say yes to what the person is doing and then build on it. And that's not to say that we can't say no to awful things that are happening in the world. Of course, of course. But to the extent we can be constructive with what reality is telling us, it's just that much, I think we're just that much more powerful and that much more in flow with life. And so to me, solar punk has that kind of overlap where it's just building on reality and from the ground up. And it's fun and it's joyful. So, I mean, a great example of that is the Soapbox Project, based here in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle and Portland. Nivia Shanta, hope she'll listen. Shout out to Nivi. I mean, her vision is connected, joyful, resilient community and transforming climate anxiety and loneliness through community-led climate action. That's really rooted in art and music and plant-based food and activism and just party time. Like, it's just fun. I mean, if you look at their website, if you look at any of what she does on social, it's really joyful. And so to me, it's like, that to me is so much more inspiring. And I want to join that party rather than like kind of sitting in the corner and crying to myself. I mean, which is tempting. Like, sometimes in the world today, it's like tempting. No fault. Like, I do that too sometimes, but like, I'd much rather spend my time, like 90% or more of my time, joining a party of people, like trying to make the most of what we got going on here on this planet.
I love that. You know, the coincidence is really beautiful to me because Nivi and I used to work with each other many years ago. Yeah. And so this call out is a real full circle moment in terms of our respective paths crossing again a little bit. We'll have to get her onto the podcast, actually. So I love you mentioning that. And I love the call out as well to, you know what, advocacy activism around this can take a very joyful tenor. In fact, we were talking recently about one of my favorite communicators and scientists, mentors, activists, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and the most inspired idea that she had of taking her work on the road. She did a book tour for the publication of her latest, for the paperback edition of her latest book, What If We Get It Right? And rather than doing exclusively book signings, she did climate dance parties across the nation. And just why not do discos when we talk about these topics? Ellen and I were intending to go to one, and she was out of the country, and I fell ill, unfortunately, the night that it was here in San Diego. But I fully resonate with you on how there is an entirely different tone and approach that can and needs to be taken as we continue to navigate these pieces. And it actually, speaking of solar punk, I feel like there's an anchor back to, our first question of being human, because one of the questions that I always had about, like, okay, so if motivation is more powerful of an activating tool than pessimism, what stories do we end up telling? Like, if we need to envision a good future, are there even, how do we tell a hero's journey in utopia? It doesn't feel like there'd be much challenge. But, recently I was mentioning to you, I read this book called Psalm for the Wild Build, which was recommended to me, and found that the intrinsic challenges you find where the setting has been created so ecologically and technologically harmonious, the challenges that you find are intrinsically human by their nature. So I think you are very much on a very similar hero's journey, Liz, from what you've been sharing.
I got so excited when you said hero's journey just now, because I love Joseph Campbell. I love that sort of mythological, like, symbolism, because I think it's just very human. I mean, we're all on a hero's journey, and to some degree, whether we, recognize it that way or not. And I think that life is just that way. We could view life as adversity. We could view life as suffering, but like, to me, it's just, time is short. Like, why not have more fun than that? And yes, like, it's important to be truthful and recognize when things are hard and when there's injustice, but I'm going to do my own thing. Yes. And like, there's a way to handle it. And I think a way to hold it, like you were saying, Ellen, that is just super constructive of how we respond inside, and like maybe have some fun with it. And I think I really wanted to go to a climate dance party too. I saw that. So next time there's one in Seattle or San Diego, maybe we can, have a virtual dance party, climate dance party.
But that's throwing me back to COVID days of dance parties online. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
but I totally believe that hope and joy and fun are forms of resilience, because like what, people who don't want you to take action want is for you to feel disempowered. And so thinking of like the hero's journey and starting back to like the beginning of your journey, at least in Microsoft with the net zero commitment, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. What was that like for you? Yeah, what was the beginning of that journey?
Yeah, well, the beginning of the journey, and this is actually, it's funny, nerdy of me, but like the hero's journey actually starts in the middle. There's usually a
Okay.
lot of stuff that happens before. And that was true, obviously true for this too. I mean, 10 years before I joined, there was a whole team of people in the late 2000s who created Microsoft's first internal carbon fee. And were leaders. They were early leaders on buying renewable energy. They were early leaders on buying carbon credit, high integrity carbon credits, and getting that flywheel going inside the company. And so that all happened well before I even darkened the door. And then in 2016 when I joined, and then between 2016 and 2020, we went through a process of rebuilding or kind of revising the sustainability strategy and the program. And Chief Sustainability Officer at that time, Lucas Joppa, persuaded the executive team to embrace climate science as a top level priority, and climate change, climate action as a top level priority, as being existential to the business and existential to the company as it is to the planet. So it stands to reason that if it's existential to the planet, it's also going to be existential to everyone's business. And so, around the world, global economy. And so he and an exec named Shelley McKinley also, just took on that persuasion effort, and as a result, the president and CFO and CEO of the company stood on the stage a month before the pandemic shut down and announced our carbon negative commitment. And so when we just rewinding back about 6 months prior to that, Lucas asked me to write the carbon negative commitment. And I remember like the day after Thanksgiving hammering it out, just thinking like, how do we align to science? How do we align to what civil society says is important? And that kind of came from the fact that he is literally a scientist. He's an ecologist by PhD by background, Lucas. And then I was an advocate. And so we married those two perspectives and said, okay, this should be our benchmark. And so we didn't know exactly how we were going to get there at the time. And that was a bold and brave move on the part of the executives to say, we don't know exactly how we're going to do that. It's very not a tech approach, tech sector. It's not a tech sector approach at all to kind of be that risk taking in a good way, to take that calculated risk. But we said, you know what, we're going to frame it that way. We're going to give that context, and we're going to say, this is what needs to happen. And this is what will help drive innovation and investment to get us there. And so then after that, and deep into the pandemic, we took the virtually, of course, with many dance parties to actually virtual dance parties to make it fun. We definitely did that. For real, we actually did. We then figured out what the building blocks would be for the commitment. And that was sort of the era of 2020 to 2025, building blocks, road mapping, and figuring out what it would take. And so we identified, for the tech sector, we identified the building blocks as renewable electricity, fuel, especially on-site fuel for data center backup generation, and low carbon materials, especially relevant now as there's data center build out. So low carbon concrete, low carbon cement, low carbon steel, and then to a lesser degree, but still valuable because of business travel, sustainable aviation fuel. And so those are kind of the big building blocks of climate solutions that we knew needed to exist for us to meet the commitment. And then another bucket of carbon removal for the hard to abate, high quality carbon removal for the hard to abate areas that weren't going to get easily covered by the first few buckets. And so, or cost effectively covered. And so, good news is in that earlier era, in the 2010s, there was a lot of work by corporates on renewable energy. And so actually voluntary corporate commitments to renewable energy essentially created the renewable energy market that we know today. It was a huge deal. Like there was, at the time, there was very, very few others funding renewable energy, and the demand from corporates was necessary through folks like the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance was necessary for that market to have demand and to get stood up. So we took that template, we applied that to these other areas. We started Microsoft's carbon removal program at the time when that didn't even really exist as a term. I mean, it existed as a term and a notion, but not a widget, not a thing that people could actually buy. And so we just said, Microsoft's position, strength is its cash position. And so we're going to use Microsoft money and procurement power to create demand signals for these different building block markets. And we partnered with an amazing team within Microsoft led by Brandon Middaugh called the Climate Innovation Fund. So we had both the funds from Microsoft's internal carbon fee, and then we had the capital investments from Microsoft Climate Innovation Fund in sort of a virtuous cycle to basically fund these, to purchase these types of solutions and then fund the companies who are creating them. And so, and that still exists to this day, although it's shifted as of late with some of Microsoft's changes. But that basic idea still stands. And I think it continues to be incredibly powerful for market development. And so over time, that commitment evolved from, really just, I think in past commitments have been more like bean counting, like ton for ton. We're going to meet to the letter of the law if it's safe. To this is more like, as one of my friends said on LinkedIn recently, more like investment science, where it's like in using the commitment to drive investment and innovation directionally so that the global economy is then decarbonized. So that's kind of the idea. And now, we're into this era of 2025 to 2030. We're coming up on the target year, the first target year, 2030. And people are understandably getting nervous. I think people are saying the tech sector has had massive AI data center build out. It's tough for them to meet their goals, understandably. They've moved from being a low emission sector to a way higher emission sector. Other areas like logistics and consumer goods may have a little bit easier of a time. Ironically, it wouldn't have been expected that 10 years ago, but now it's like maybe it's just a little different and a lot different. And so I think, the way I see it and the way Lucas Joppa and I wrote about it in a Nature article last year was that, there's certain mindset roadblocks to in the wider community to how we're going to meet these commitments. They don't have to be actual roadblocks. Basically, it's just, I think, get everybody getting on the same page with the mindset that we want to encourage these voluntary actions. We don't want to penalize corporations for not being perfect. You need to allow these first movers to move. And so our Nature article was all about that and about specific ways that we thought like NGOs and civil society could be a bit more encouraging of that theory of change. And so, so that's kind of how I see it now. And whether or not they meet their literal commitments in 2030, to me, it's like the bigger measure of success is whether we're affecting change in the broader society for decarbonization. Now, that is an answer that's still like debatable and maybe not, but that's, to me, it's become that litmus test, which is versus different, like ton versus ton for ton accounting. That was a
I
lot.
mean, there is so much to unpack there, and I'm a little giddy at the number of different directions to take it, because I was living this very same period in other halls, and seeing these developments unfold. And I remember being the person who, saw the news of the carbon negative commitment hit headlines, downloading that, forwarding it on to all my colleagues, taking it into leadership meetings with me as a case study to build the business case on our side. As at the time, I was with a major Microsoft supplier, and using that as an indicator for the direction things are headed. And so, to answer the question that you posed at the very end, like, is this affecting change? I, for one, can absolutely validate that it has and had been affecting change, because this was at a time when SBTI didn't even exist yet, right? So there was no quantitative sense by which you needed to be affecting your supply chain quite so much, right? And yet, the fact that Microsoft stepped forward and did this was enough of an argument for us to do so as well. Now, the thing that I am just at the edge of my seat to hear is, as you mentioned, it was a very brave decision by these executives to go with it when there was no clear path for how to achieve it. In your estimation at the time, what were the most compelling points that did land with them, and how might you advise them differently, or how might you advise CSOs or boards or C-suites today on making equally ambitious, taking equally ambitious steps, as we both know are very much needed?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think that at the time, the world was very different. Politics were different. I'm going to take it from my perspective, my more abstract perspective of climate science and advocacy, to more like real world, real politic kind of stuff right now that we're seeing. The politics were very different. The business was very different. And I think that what probably really spoke to executives was the alignment of science with the mission of a company that is fundamentally a science and engineering company. And so I think that rationality really resonated. And I think that the existential nature of climate change probably really landed as being critical to long-term planning and to long-term business resilience, because that really can't be denied. The laws of politics may be distorted and changed, and systems may be fragmenting on the political spectrum, but in terms of the laws of physics, we can't bend the laws of physics to make climate change not real, no matter how much a politician or someone might wish to say otherwise. And so to me, it's just a real acknowledgement of reality. And at a time I still think there actually was a fair bit of cognitive dissonance. And so I do think that it was, it's easy in hindsight to say, oh yeah, they were just acknowledging reality. But actually I think it was brave. It had its elements of courage. And I think that it was kind of a happy convergence, a fortunate convergence of the right attitudes, the right mindsets, the right, Microsoft hadn't gone all in on AI yet. And I think some really good internal organizing. When I joined Microsoft, I don't take credit for this part, but when I joined Microsoft in 2016, I had just come from being sort of a political community organizer at the city level of a wonderful organization of 20 people, moving to Microsoft of 130,000 people and thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I've just joined a multinational company. How do I think about it? And thanks to advice from a good friend of mine, I started to think about Microsoft as like a city, like 130,000 people at the time. How would we organize that to mobilize climate action? And so we did that, and what we really did was we thought through what the different executives, even beyond the top three execs, what the different executives would want and need, and we sort of mobilized a little campaign to make it exciting, and kind of lit up little pilot projects that would light a fire of enthusiasm for broader change. And then they got excited, and then they saw like, oh, the carbon fee is not a threat. It could be a game. We could gamify it, and we could try to organize ourselves to avoid paying the carbon fee in a good way, like in a constructive mindset. And again, the business was very different then. So I can't say what it's going on now because I'm not there. I haven't been there for a couple of years, but I do know that, the business pressures are real and the AI gold rush is real. And so, it's a different world now.
Oftentimes we see organizations, governments, people making commitments, but then not having all the tools, resources, or maybe excitement to actually follow through on that. So how have you seen people do that?
Well, it's been very interesting, again, to bring it back to the individual human level. I often put myself these days in the shoes of either chief sustainability officers or sustainability practitioners in corporate setting, even the political setting. And I think about just, again, the camaraderie of connecting one-to-one or in small groups across sectors, maybe with peers. I always really enjoyed connecting across the tech sector with my colleagues at Amazon, Google, and others. And I felt like in doing that, there was just a real sense of empowerment in a time when, even then, during the pandemic, it felt like our influence over systems and our collective future kind of felt slippery and uncertain. And so to me, that sort of peer-to-peer organizing was very powerful. And I see that in the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance. I see that in the Center for Green Market Activation. I see that in other work around the voluntary carbon market, like Beyond Alliance, where folks are learning from each other. They're coming up the learning curve together and not reinventing the wheel. They're sharing tools with each other. And really leaning into the fact that they and we have a shared mission of and are very purpose driven around protecting the planet to the extent we can, that goes above and beyond their corporate vision and corporate mission and corporate obligations. It's congruent and like complementary to the corporate. Oftentimes, sometimes not. Sometimes it is. There's tricky stuff about what you can talk about and can't. But I think the best moments are where you can. And I look at folks like the nature carbon removal platform Symbiosis, where a bunch of companies are leaning in to purchase high integrity nature-based carbon removal together as a really important source of funding to protect nature and to advance nature-based technology. And so to me, it's really does come back to that human level of peer-to-peer collaboration, really. And then I also think about it does come back to how do we address the resource consumption of AI as well. I get really excited about the work that Cloverleaf Infrastructure is doing. The former exec of renewable energy at Microsoft, Brian Janis, has brought a lot of the former Microsoft renewable energy team over to Cloverleaf now to build out their team that is doing site pre-positioning for data center companies and doing it in a really sustainable way. He brought over Danielle Decatur, who is the head of environmental justice for Microsoft. He brought over a bunch of folks who are super, super values driven and really committed to doing data center build out in a way that is actually maybe even welcome by communities. I also think about what Joanne Garbin is doing with Regenerous Labs and her Innovating Out Loud podcast. she has a really strong vision for regenerative data centers in a way that I think is a counterpoint to a lot of the doomerism we're hearing. Now, I'm not a booster. I'm not an AI booster. I'm not a data center booster, just to be clear. But I do think that there's opportunities to use that investment push to create goodness. How do we make lemonade out of lemons here? If all that money is going toward build out, how do we use it to then also build climate solutions? And so I think that that's not a slam dunk. It really depends on the folks in the tech sector continuing to be willing to fund these solutions. But I think it's an opportunity. So it's a very, very concrete opportunity.
I love that. It is being front and center, the whole leapfrog principle that so much of sustainability has tried to platform itself on, I feel like. And the opportunity it feels like we have at hand is, listen, as a society, we have progressed through the Industrial Revolution without really any awareness of the impacts thereof. We are now experiencing the AI revolution. So can we actually build that with sustainability, with environment, with holistic wellness as a society in as part of the design, right?
Such an important analogy. Yeah. And I dare I say too, I mean, it may not be popular, but because there's so much cheerleading on AI that can feel empty. But I do want to say, I know amazing nature tech companies and climate tech companies who are using AI to accelerate environmental intelligence and protection outcomes. I mean, Francesca, I think of Vital Ocean. I think of your company, your awesome company, making sense of environmental data to improve decision making. And a lot more organizations want to be able to do that and need help figuring out how. Other than just asking Claude or, Copilot, what? There's more, that's my version. There's more sophistication that I think that a lot of these, whether it's startup CEOs or nonprofit executive directors, need to have in order to help accelerate the goodness.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I would be biased to do so. Otherwise, I wouldn't be dedicating so much of my energy towards it. But, anchoring back to the start of our conversation, we were saying there can be a lack of joyfulness in the work because it is serious work and it needs to be taken seriously. But with AI, we have the opportunity to move so much of that which makes it serious, mundane, rote, tedious and detailed, which it needs to be because it needs to be accurate, but we can move that to the AI so that we can work more on, as you did so effectively at Microsoft and have done ever since then, working on the human connection, working on the messaging, working on the community building. And I actually want to talk about the ways in which you do that now. You are head of Earthrise, founder of Earthrise, and you made that move upon leaving Microsoft. I'd love to hear, what did that leap feel like? And also, actually, before even going into that, could you share a little bit about Earthrise and what you do in that capacity?
Sure. Thank you for asking. Earthrise speaks to deep nerdiness on my part, both for the planet and for astronomy. Because Earthrise speaks about the photograph that an astronaut took of the Earth when in outer space. It's one of the famous photos, and to me, it just encapsulates how precious this planet is, to how precious this planet is in the whole universe. And I think of Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot commentary, and I get really moved when I see imagery like that, because I think it's just so easy for us to get addicted to our phones and immersed in our daily lives and lose sight of what's really going on here. And so to me, that's sort of the spirit. I started independent advising in 2024 when I left Microsoft, because frankly, I had health challenges and needed to leave the corporate world. I needed to leave that schedule that I had, and I needed to build my own schedule from the ground up. And I wanted to create some of the awesome vibes, recreate some of the awesome vibes I had had during our COVID dance parties, and truly, like, when we were building the carbon program, we were building the sustainable aviation fuel program, we were building the, all those elements, the carbon, read code, co-designing the carbon fee with other people, just having all that fun, all that camaraderie, like day in and day out. I mean, the pandemic was terrible for a lot of people, but for me on those projects, there was a lot of joy, actually. And so I remember thinking in spring of 2024, kind of dusting myself off from this health stuff. I thought, like, what do I want to do with my life? Like, I want to create that joy again. And so fast forward 2 years, now I have an amazing business partner, Courtney Weinstein out of Atlanta, we've just been totally jamming out on advising a very cool blue carbon company called Brightwater Climate, focused on Belize, focused on protecting mangroves and seagrass in Belize, and turning those into carbon credits and potentially biodiversity credits. That is one example of a few projects I've worked on. It's one that speaks to the inner teenager in me who is, like, obsessed with, the oceans and nature, and especially areas of the world like that, coral reefs and stuff that are still under threat. And so it's very much like this project brings out sort of the youthful energy in me, because it's so much about who I've been my whole life. So I speak about that sort of very candidly, because I think there can be a loss of that in this world, like in this crazy time of seemingly horrible news and sometimes truly horrible news, literally. But I think that there's a way that if we can find that youthfulness, that joy again, and that fun, it really does. It adds years to our lives, right? Like it adds energy. It's like a fountain of energy to me. And so I've worked on other amazing projects as well, sustainable aviation fuel, and helping an amazing nonprofit here in the Seattle area called the Clean Energy Transition Institute. Also advising a nonprofit as a volunteer called Green Empowerment, which advances micro energy and water solutions in villages around the world. They've been a long time, probably around for 25 or 30 years, and really proud of and honored to be involved in what they do. And I think that, that's, to me, Earthrise is like my version of just building a portfolio of projects for my life that also includes gardening and walking my dog and hiking, with my husband, and meditation and stuff. And so to me, it's like building a life around the projects of how I want to spend my time, and then trying to make an income from that. So kind of balancing, like, how much I need to spend to live a relatively simple life, and covering that with how much I actually bring in the door. And so then that's involved into coaching. So I'm actually coaching people on that very topic, which is super duper fun. I welcome anyone who wants to explore that, because it's just a total delight for me. I think it's probably my favorite thing right now is to coach people on how to be entrepreneurs. Especially relevant in this, as you were saying, Ellen, in this resilience economy, relevant now where AI is crashing on the workforce, like for goods and bads, we don't know yet. And like people are worried about their jobs, and people may be in a long line for, a corporate job that may or may not happen. And so to me, it's like, how do we kind of take our expectations about life and about work, kind of take it down to the basics, and say, all right, how am I gonna fund my life? Can I do that entrepreneurially? By that I mean, like, creatively. You don't have to have your own business, but how do I do that creatively? And, like, how do I make a livelihood? And so I am really, really totally jamming out on how to coach people to do that right now, and including coaching startups, existing startup CEOs, but then also people who are just like entertaining, do I stay in my job? Do I leave my job? Do I try to go out on my own? What's resilient, like both professionally and personally? So that's what I'm that's what I'm doing now, and it's just a ton of fun, ton of fun.
That sounds amazing. And I couldn't agree more that in this current era, I think one of the ways we can be most resilient, in addition to dance parties, I want to keep bringing that back up, is creating our own lives, whether it be starting your own business, or I know a lot of people talk about building your personal brand, being known as an expert online. Can you give like a little sneak peek teaser of maybe some of the advice you give to people who are on the edge, like considering it, like they have a job, but they're like, "Oh, maybe I could do this other thing." Like, what are the skills and things you see of people who succeed in doing that? What words of advice do you give as like a teaser for your
Yeah,
coaching work?
I love that question. Um, I almost would even wanted to plant that question with you because I love that question. I I really ask people, as I ask myself, to be brutally constructively honest,
Mm.
um, with myself and with them about what they want and like what their true values are, what
Mm.
their true self inside, not their like not their performative, not their protective self that's like, oh, what does my spouse want, or what does my mom and dad want, or what does my boss want, what do I think someone on social wants? I mean, who cares? Like, oh god, life is too short. Easy for me to say, I know. Easy for me to say, I've had i'm I'm well into my life journey now, so it's safer for me to say that now. But I feel like that is the most that's the most valuable, important conversation to have, is with yourself. What do I truly want? What am I truly good at? Like, not
Mm.
putting on airs, not putting on pretenses about it, just like cold hard truth. And potentially having a good sounding board on that, whether it's a spouse or a best friend or a therapist or a coach or a colleague, you know, I think having that really constructive but honest view, candid view of what you're about, what you're capable of, what makes you tick, what makes you get up in the morning and be happy. And so that's a starting place. And then from there, kind of recognizing what reality is, how reality is going to respond. And like, you may have dreamed of being in the White House, or you may have dreamed of being in corporate America, but like, also kind of being realistic that some of those expectations of shit have to shift in this world. And so being a little bit flexible to finding some of the same dreams, or like fulfilling some of the same dreams or goals in a different form than you might have expected. Life has sort of relentlessly taught me that, over the years, for better now. I mean, I think in the time it was like a lot of suffering, but like for better now, I'm like, oh God, thank God thank God life taught me that, because now I have had this having a beautiful experience on the other side of it. But, I think that's really the biggest thing. And then from that, a lot of other stuff flows. I think then they can be, as one of my old bosses used to say, like, once you have this structure of parameters of a certain set of criteria, then you can be creative within that. It's like, once you have that structure in place, then you can kind of like be flexible, but you have to have that grounding. You have to have that anchor, kind of both feet planted on the ground in a way, in order to then improvise, to getting back to improvising. And I think that, then I would kind of take people through, all right, well, then based on your values and based on your criteria and kind of knowing yourself, which sector do you want to focus on? Do you want to work in government, nonprofit, corporate, investment? Like, is that possible? Kind of running it through the reality test. And then, given the constraints of jobs in different areas, like thinking about, okay, well, am I potentially suited to starting my own business? I don't know. It's not for everybody, but maybe it works, maybe it's for you. And then thinking through, like, I think you mentioned this, Ellen. How do you use AI to help like create a podcast? Or how do you help use AI to run a financial model? Do a little like team up with a friend who's interested in the same thing and like get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and like have a self-guided boot camp with AI to just get some of those things, have some peer accountability and get some of those things done. And I think at the end of the day, it has to, I'm not Pollyanna to think like, oh, everybody can make money doing what they want. Like sometimes you just have to do stuff that you don't want to do. That's been plenty of times in my life. But I do think like there is sometimes that Venn diagram overlap of like something you really love does have financial business value to someone else and they're willing to pay you for it, So it's kind of that. And so I think within that context, there's a lot of room to be creative. And there's a lot of room to like actually potentially live the life maybe more like you want. If someone's not currently satisfied, like maybe there's an opportunity to like change some of those levers to make it more satisfying. That again was a lot. Passion topic. So,
well, I was just gonna say we came on here to record a podcast and came away with life lessons. So, what more could one ask for? That's fantastic, Liz. I personally really appreciate that. We appreciate it on behalf of our listeners. And I think we could I would love to spend a whole lunchtime, a whole afternoon, a whole day talking more because there's clearly so much in common here and so much to build on. But looking at time, I did also want to make sure to ask you the question we ask all our guests, which is, what is making you optimistic about the future and whom should we speak to next?
Oh, well, one thing that I read recently, which was very inspiring to me, was that these researchers from Germany and Denmark did a global climate change survey a couple years ago as part of a world poll. And they found that 69, they surveyed across 125 countries, interviewing nearly 130,000 individuals. And they found that 69% of the global population surveyed expressed a willingness to contribute 1% of their personal income to climate. I mean, that's real money. And 1% is not a ton, but it's real money. And across all that pool, 86% endorsed pro-climate norms for behavior and politics, and that 89% demanded intensified political action. And so I kind of, again, nerded out on that because I thought that's such a counterpoint to what we hear about people being asleep. And to me, it speaks to a real kind of collective awakening about how precious this planet is and how much we should actually care. So to me, that was very inspiring as a former, sort of political person. That was very inspiring about people's awareness about this issue. And actually also I would say, related to this, I would say definitely interview Nivi. I want to hear that. I'm going to listen and sign up for you to interview Nivi Ashanta.
Beautiful. Yeah, you heard it here first. That's coming up soon then.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for all the amazing, incredible insights you shared. The true bravery of corporations is also very inspiring to hear that is possible and can happen. And I do believe we can get back to a place where that can happen again. At the end of the day, we are all human and we all want the same thing and we do want a better future. And so I think if we just work together, we can get there. So thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to learn more or how to work with you, where can they go for more information?
I keep a very low profile, but online. But you can find me on LinkedIn. That's my favorite social platform. Nerding out on environmental updates on LinkedIn.
Love it. Well, we will share your link to your LinkedIn in the show notes for those who may be interested in working with you. As always, stay optimistic, stay connected, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the Optimist Circuit on Spotify or Apple Podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And let's keep the conversation going. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram at The Optimist Circuit for more insights and inspiration.
Until next time, stay optimistic, stay curious, and stay inspired.